Hey, everybody. Welcome back, or welcome to, if this is the first time you're tuning in, Vectra AI podcast. We call it the Prodcast, play on words. It's just a bunch of us product people at Vectra AI talking about product, talking about attacks, talking about a whole bunch of different stuff. But today it's a special episode. It's a different kind of episode. We're joined by a friend of Vectra in full transparency. Erik is a customer, but I'm not having him here to sing the praises of Vectra AI. I'm having him here to teach us something. I want to pick his brain. Erik, tell tell everybody what you want them to know about yourself.
Um, okay.
Introduce yourself. Well,
Yeah, I'm Eric. I've worked at American University for 28 years, 9 months and change. Before that, I ran outsourced help desks. Uh, and I like to say I got into cybersecurity because I was raised on a farm, and my dad taught me how to rip stuff apart and sit and think about, well, why is it broken? How do I fix it? And that sort of mindset is was really responsible for a lot of me getting into security because I was super curious about, well, how did this really work?
Yeah,
Yeah. So
awesome.
if I did the time between dates because funnily enough, my I was married on the same month and day as I was my first day of work at American, which was October 20, November 21st, 1995.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I actually started off in technology, like I said, running help desks, and we had student employees. I had to figure out a new batch of student employees every semester. Um, and I made myself such a nuisance within the first year that they offered me a job on one of the more technical teams, and I left managing the help desk and went off to I did student setups, and then I worked as the networking guy for the university's internet connection. Back then, we had a T1, so it was an
Wow.
unimaginable amount of
You,
bandwidth,
yeah,
and there were no filters on it.
the floodgates open.
Yeah, I just had so much fun back then because there was stuff like Sniffer had just come out, and so I had dedicated workstations that so I could start to visualize what the internet traffic for the university looked like. I would freak people out. A couple Beltway bandits in around DC, I saw them scanning our network, and I knew how who is and stuff like that worked. I'd figured that out. So I picked up the phone and I called some of these people and freaked them the heck out. Because I remember specifically one guy was just like, "How the hell did you know I was doing this?" He was seriously freaked out. Um, and then there were a series of criminal cases that came to the university about objectionable content, which is the level of detail I'll go into
Yeah.
on where people were trafficking in this very objectionable type of content. It got reported to the president of the university. I had to work with some government agencies to gather the evidence on that, and that I was able to parlay into a security focused position
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
the university in 1999.
Wow.
So,
No.
yeah.
Well, you've seen it all. I mean, and you're the perfect person that whose brain I want to pick on this topic because I go to a lot of conferences and trade shows and read a bunch of research, and there's all of these I don't talent seems to come in every conversation, right? Whether it's like security burnout, whether it's security shortage, whether it's you name it, it's like there's all of these different conversations happening around talent. And I wanted to pick your brain on that a little bit because the way you described yourself, and you and I had talked about this briefly in the past, this whole notion of security specialist versus security generalist. right? And how would you describe the difference between those two kind of labels, so to speak?
Well, more in general terms, I guess I would call it the jack of all trades slash, you know, you know enough about how things work to troubleshoot just about anything. That goes a
Yeah,
long way versus a tool pusher, someone who knows, oh, I know CyberArk or I know this tool.
yeah.
Um, I think,
Is there a benefit to either one? Is one better than the other in this day and age? Does it
well,
matter?
yeah, I think it really depends on the size of your organization and team and like your mission. Because definitely, I want the world's best CyberArk guy if I'm a giant enterprise and that's my tool for privilege management. I want the person who's really geeked out on that. But a mid-sized enterprise like our university, which, we have around 6,000 employees between full-time and part-time,
Yeah,
to give you an idea, and about it's probably on the order of 12,000 students at any one time. It's not small,
yeah,
but they're only funding 4 technical security positions.
yeah,
So we have to be able to cover that footprint with our resources. So I
yeah,
need people who I can throw them a curveball. Early in my career, the university started buying up real estate wherever it could in the DC area. If something came up for sale around the university, because that's a big driver in the university, is space. You want space to dedicate towards students and move administrative stuff, and that doesn't need to be student facing away from them, so that you can expend that and attract students by
yeah,
the space and the facilities they have. One day, I walk into work in the early 2000s, and my boss at that time says, "Hey, we just bought an apartment building and we're going to give everybody internet service at the apartment building. Here's the list of Cisco cable modem termination system hardware. Figure out what we need to do to do that." I had never worked in cable. So, all right.
hence your background image.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But 3 months later, we had a working DOCSIS config. My colleague and I, who was my first cybersecurity hire, I think I was director of network security at that time. The titles changed over the years. We had figured out, because it was the time of DMCA, so we had to be able to say, "Hey, that's Mark there who's sharing out all
yeah,
this copyrighted material." Um, 3 months later, we installed it, we had it working, and we had a DMCA case 6 months later that the university got out of paying a big fine.
yeah,
So it takes a certain type of person to be comfortable with, well, I'm not going to have documentation. I'm not going to necessarily have a playbook of how to fix this problem, how to come up with a solution. And you've got to be comfortable with saying, being practical and saying, well, how do I want to get there? Let's figure it out.
yeah,
Let's
yeah,
be willing to adjust along the way.
yeah. This is interesting because I've always I think some of the best security people, God, you could argue this about research, anyone in research, right? Is they're they're almost like mystery solvers. You've got to be inquisitive, right? You got to be curious, right? You got to have this constant, drive for information and knowledge. And when you're wired that way, regardless of your background, when you're just pre-wired that way, you know, uh, to solve mysteries. Some say engineers do that. Some say, people in liberal arts and sciences do that. People, it's like it doesn't matter necessarily, what you're educated in. It's kind of how you're wired. Um, how would you react to that? Is that a big piece of it?
I would totally agree with that. Like I referenced before, growing up on a farm and getting thrown, hey, the
Yeah.
brakes on the tractor are fixed. Go figure out how to fix them. Um, my degrees are in history and French. So I learned how to
History,
communicate.
like mystery solving,
Yeah,
connecting the dots, figuring things out, how are things related to each other, etc.
yeah. And then French. the whole, I'm a horrible programmer. I'll be the first, but I'm pretty darn good at figuring out the general gist of code if I look at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's the same part of the brain. And then the other saving grace I had is that I went to Carnegie Mellon in the early 90s. And in the early 90s, all my liberal arts buddies from Carnegie Mellon from back then were all in technology because we learned how to communicate, and every kid who went through Carnegie Mellon at that time was ahead of the game because they required you to learn how to program in Pascal at least,
Yeah.
learn how to do bulletin boards, learn how to browse uh, hyper enabled materials. The web wasn't around yet,
Yeah.
but the
Yeah.
concepts were there. So it's fun. A good friend of mine is a big technology wig at PPG and a bunch work for the consulting houses. I mean, it's crazy how many liberal arts folks went that way and are in very technical positions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think my daughter is tired of me. She's liberal arts. She just graduated. Tired of me of pushing her into, hey, you should look at cyber. You should look at cyber. Oh, I'm not qualified for that. I didn't study that. I'm like, I don't believe you need to. Like they're looking for brains like yours, analytical, questioning, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah,
Hey,
I
Mark,
mean,
can you hold on one sec?
yeah, this is a typical, this is a
Yeah.
typical conversation with the security person. There's always something happening in the background that,
My son has a friend over and they just took some of our dogs for a walk and they're
oh,
coming back. They didn't know I
okay.
was on this.
That's okay. And background noise and bring the dogs in. It's like good to see the personal side of you. We learned quite a bit that way about who we're talking to. Because at the end of the day, it's like the conversation should be like this. Like when
But
yeah, go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, I think you're spot on with your daughter is that if she has a good mind, she can grasp new concepts and she can communicate effectively. You know, uh, I don't think I mean, I came out of college with this breadth of experience because I worked in the computing labs
Yeah,
as a,
yeah,
attendant all 4 years. Um, I got this great exposure then, but I also taught myself so much on the job. You could come out with a liberal arts degree and get into SOC work, I
yeah,
think, right
yeah,
now. And if
yeah,
you really wanted to push it and you did the same sort of things that I did, which was, I built my own home network that tried to replicate what my employer was doing so I could give more uh, and be better at my job. If you're driven for that, it's a great career path. We've had several student interns that came through our shop at American University that worked in marketing, in
yeah,
communications, things like that were not cyber related, and now they work for big three consulting firms doing cyber stuff.
yeah.
One works at a what is it? Leidos, some of
Okay.
their
Yeah,
outsourced SOC
yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. What do you say? What do you say? I just it's just this image popped in my head as you and I are talking. Like if what do you say to the listener out there that's like, you two are from the 90s, man. You're stuck in the past. Cyber's so sophisticated and advanced these days. We need people that are trained in cyber and understand cyber. Like, what's your response to that? Like, you have a team. Your team, you hire talent, you look for talent. Is that true? Like, what? No.
No, so much is the same. Uh, Over 90% of your compromised accounts, intrusions, things like that, what do they all start with, Mark? They start with you, the human.
Human and identity. I always say that. Like, the attackers need two things to
Exactly.
be successful: an identity and a network. That's all they
Eh,
need.
That's all.
It's like, so,
And and how do they get it?
they fool
They
me.
s- that's right. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always about creating a sense of urgency that you can trick someone, creating a power imbalance that can be perceived and be exploited. Like, hey, I'm your brand new 2 levels up boss, and I'm in my son's birthday party, and I can't talk right now.
Yeah.
Go get me gift cards. I mean, or go
Yeah.
do this
Yeah.
for me.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here's the ironic thing, Eric. I'm a marketing guy, right? So I'm a marketing guy, full transparency. It's funny how in security marketing, we treat you with the same thing. Like we go after you, the buyer, with the same things the attacker goes after the individual with: fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Play off the emotions. Try to get a meeting, et cetera, et cetera. Versus,
Hmm.
let's just have a conversation. Let's just talk about whether or not, can we solve this problem? What can we agree on the problem? Can we solve it? To your point, can we break this thing down and figure out what's going on so that we can come up with a solution to that? So anyway, you just triggered that in my head. I'm like, oh gosh, cut with the FUD and the FOMO. Just talk straight.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I mean, so what? This was great. This was fantastic. I could talk to you for hours, but I don't know if people will listen to the two of us for hours.
Yeah.
Um, what people don't have hours to listen to us. Um, any like in terms of like talent, right? Hiring, recruiting, retaining, up leveling skills, right? Because I think that's a big piece of it, right? Is you bring people in and people just want to grow and develop and advance their careers and learn more and et cetera, et cetera. Like what any kind of three things, like three things that you kind of hone in on relative to takeaways for the listeners in terms of
So,
talent.
so in my interviews, um, depending on the level of the position, because we have cybersecurity engineer, 1, 2, 3 type of designations, and I've been super lucky that my senior most cybersecurity engineers have generally graduated on to become deputy CISOs
Yeah,
or senior cybersecurity talent at other organizations. I've been able. I'm very proud of being able to mentor that type of talent, but to all the successful ones, and what I really try and design my interview process to bring out is, do they have some level of fundamental knowledge
hmm,
that they can build on? And are they inquisitive and willing to be wrong and be to try different things and
yeah,
to experiment?
yeah,
Um, I think I'm remembering back how many times have products been proposed to the university for management or computer management, or enterprise resource and planning products, and they come in, and our security team has been the ones who've questioned and looked. We had an ERP system that was using a clear text telnet client basically to manage it, and I'm like, this is not okay, and
yeah,
no one's sought to ask this question before we got to the point that they signed on the line. You didn't give
yeah,
me a chance to do that, but that's because I'm inquisitive. I'm the computer management product. Nowhere in their documentation do they state the encryption standards they use to transmit credentials over the wire.
yeah,
Well, okay, let's figure it out. How would I determine that? How would I
yeah,
determine whether their traffic is, or whether they're using defensible encryption? And, I spent a lot of my early career working with Linux, because it was an area that I knew was going to be really useful to me, because there were lots of cutting edge projects out there in open source
yeah,
security land. Like I started with Snort, and the first overlay that went over it that you could use and consume Snort alerts in a graphical format. Um, Looking for that example of, well, I'll ask them questions directed at, when were you faced with a problem that you couldn't find any sort of like canned answer for? how did you solve it, or what did you do? What was your process like to
Yeah.
get to a solution or failure?
Yeah.
And you can learn a lot from that. I also ask some leading questions where I'll leave the open end of, hey, one example was, you're going to go visit CNN.com from your computer at home. You type in that into your web browser. Tell me what happens.
Yeah.
And be as detailed as you can.
Yeah.
And it's very different whether someone starts and says, well, okay, well, it's going to go from the application to your local resolving config versus, oh, well, the browser will go out and ask for the page from the server over there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ways to really poke at how much do you really understand. I remember there was all this talk about the digital millennial generation,
Yeah.
or the
Yeah.
the technology natives, and how they were going to just know everything implicitly. And it's not true.
Yeah.
It's
No.
not true. They know how to like on an Instagram, and unless you find those people with that inquisitive nature about, well, how does this really work?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know how to use the technology. Sure, they can
Yes.
use it, but
Yeah.
who understands how it can be abused potentially? And you don't have to have all the answers. Sometimes I don't know is a good enough answer, but you know what? I'm going to try and figure that out,
Hmm.
right? It's like so anyway, this was fantastic. I think you had said a couple things from like, oh, that's another conversation with Erik that we should have. Like I'm like you're triggering all these ideas about like additional conversations we can have about topics like this because this is hey, I learned more in this 20 minutes talking to you than I would reading a 40-page research paper where I can't figure out what the heck it's telling me. So I love these conversations. I wish, we would have more of these with security professionals like yourself, versus just, pitching product and schlepping stuff and planting FUD and FOMO and all that sort of stuff. So I appreciate you coming on, being candid, sharing your insights and knowledge. This was awesome, Erik. And your schedule permitting, we might have to have you back. We'll have to tee up another conversation.
Well, I'd love to talk more. I think it's something that any organization needs to really think carefully about. Um, if you're going to have dedicated security staff, you don't you don't want to. You really do want to have people who can think on their feet,
Yeah,
because I'm sorry, vendor, but that's part of my job, is to put vendors' feet to the fire and say, why aren't you doing this? And
yeah,
unless you understand what's involved, it's harder to do that.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Awesome. On that note,
Okay.
thanks, Erik. This was great.
Hey,
Appreciate your time.
I really
Appreciate
enjoyed it,
everything.
Mark.
Yeah, this was
Yeah,
awesome.
of course.
Thank you so much.
All
All
right.
right.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. Until the next time. Thanks again.
Bye, everybody.